Marketers, you know that feeling when your content just works? When you crush a viral trend before 10 a.m.? When one tiny tweak to a landing page sends click-through rates through the roof? That's Contentful. Dynamic content made blissfully simple. Contentful helps you create and launch personalized experiences instantly across any digital channel. No stress, no limits, only possibilities. Come get the feels at Contentful.com.
Parents of tweens, if you're familiar with far-off drop-offs...
Dad, stop, right here.
Or get DMs about what's for dinner, you may be experiencing tween milestones. For your son or daughter, these can start at age 9. HPV vaccination, a type of cancer prevention against certain HPV-related cancers, can start then too.
For most, HPV clears on its own. But for those who don't clear the virus, it can cause certain cancers later in life.
Embrace this phase. Help protect them in the next.
Ask their doctor today about HPV vaccination. Brought to you by Merck.
Welcome to Farm Here Daily, a Field Forward podcast. I'm David Geiger, your host. I've been on Iowa TV and radio for the last decade, and I am excited to join you on this podcast, Farm Here Daily. Today on the program, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was signed by President Trump. We will check out its impact on producers here with Brent Johnson, president of the Iowa Farm Bureau. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media at Field Forward Pod. Also share with your friends if you can. We would love to have you all join our community, keeping folks informed about what is affecting our farmers. This is Farm Here Daily. And joining me on Farm Here Daily, we have Brent Johnson, president of the Iowa Farm Bureau. Brent, always good to have you on the program. Really appreciate your time. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed Congress and then was signed by the president on the 4th of July. And I was relaxing most of this last weekend, but I was keeping an eye on my inbox, and I got a whole bunch of emails from farm groups saying that there was some good stuff for farmers. So we're going to go into that and maybe talk about some of the other things that might arise from the bill here today. So Brent, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, always good to be with you, David.
All right, Brent, let's start off with some of the tax provisions of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. That was one of the biggest hypes that I was seeing so far over the weekend. What did you view as kind of the big names of tax provisions that went through on this bill?
Yeah, that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was passed a few years ago was going to be sunsetting. And so, that was almost probably one of the biggest parts about the Big Beautiful Bill that wasn't being talked about for quite some time until we got closer to the end. And many of those provisions in that tax bill were very beneficial to farmers and small businesses. And this reconciliation package put almost all of those tax provisions in as permanent status. And, some of the things that really affect farmers specifically, it raises the estate tax limit to $15 million per individual. And, and they put that, they put an escalator in there for inflation as well. So that when you talk about farm transitions and keeping things in the family, that was extremely important to keep that at a reasonable level. Keeping 100% bonus depreciation, even small things like farmers' ability to maintain cash accounting. I mean, it's hard to believe that we would have to talk about that, but most farmers use cash counting when it comes to keeping track of their books, and this bill made sure that we could do that for in the long term into the future.
I know it's really difficult for younger farmers to get into the business. A big part of that is land prices, but I believe within this bill there was also some work done to make it so a farmer could sell it to their heir a little easier.
Yeah, well, and that's part of that estate tax and that whole transition piece. Some of those details they're pretty complex. We're still reading the bills in many fashions, trying to figure out exactly where all those things play in. But keeping farmers as far as the tax penalties or keeping those at a minimum, if any, and making sure that we can keep farms in the family, transition to the next generation and that was an important part of this bill moving forward.
Aside from the tax provisions, was there anything that stuck out to you as a farmer that was really supported by this new One Big Beautiful Bill Act?
Well, there was there was actually a lot of commodity risk management tools that were updated. There's a whole string of things there. Crop insurance, reference prices. Reference prices is one of those things that really got a huge update. In this new bill,
Right, for ARC and PLC.
Yeah, for ARC and PLC. Yeah, exactly. The reference price for corn is now set at 4.10, but really the biggest mover is soybeans at $10. And if that movement right there is absolutely huge. A $10 reference price equates to a 19% increase in that reference price to actually put it within reasonable range as we deal with these risk management tools. So to bring those reference prices into place was absolutely needed, and to have a major crop have one of the largest reference price increases was absolutely needed. There's a lot of things in there when it comes to there's some base acre conversations in there. There's dairy margin coverage conversations, there's livestock conversations, there's when it comes to the actual risk management tools that farmers employ year in year out in their farm businesses, many of those farm program type risk management tools are taken care of in this reconciliation package.
I think of the last time those updates were had, which was the 2018 Farm Bill, so quite a few years ago, and that was well before COVID-19 pandemic hit, and we had all of the supply chain issues, which then had things like energy prices and specifically fertilizer prices cause some pretty big issues. So the inputs are significantly higher. Do you think 19% is even enough of an increase from 6-7 years ago?
Well, you articulated it pretty well, but the idea of our farm bill and the risk management tools that are in there today were placed in 2017, a 2018 farm bill based on 2017 economics. Generationally, that is financially a generation off, and we are in an entirely different place. I remember going through buying fertilizers during the pandemic, during that steep inflation run, and some of the nitrogen fertilizers were up 300% in a year, and just absolutely astounding as to what those costs were. But today's reference prices in this current farm bill are set all the way back there, so they really were unrealistic. So to have a 19% increase, that's they're there for a reason. They're there to help set the floor. I don't think anybody really wants them to be a part of their revenue game, but this is a risk management tool, and to have that floor brought up to a place where it's actually reasonable to deal with in a financial situation, I think it's a pretty appropriate number, and to have that set at $10, we're depressed in our soybean market right now. We are not profitable, and we're close to that $10. It feels like we're probably in the neighborhood.
As we continue to look through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act in its entirety, are there any specific Iowa points that spring up that you think will be beneficial to producers in the state?
So the 45Z tax credit, that was extended and brought up to date. There's so much there. The 45Z, we've had some issues in the past with foreign domestic feedstocks gaining those credits, and those credits would actually going over to seas, and this bill stops that. So the 45Z tax credits for biofuels needs to stay in North America, and that's exactly what this bill does, and so it really helps to drive a lot of those domestic feedstocks, making sure that our U.S. tax credits stay in North America, and so ultimately driving biofuels. And as we all know, Iowa leads the nation in ethanol production, biodiesel production, so many other categories as well. But when it comes to some of those biofuels type circumstances that are in this bill, that is going to be probably a little bit weighted towards an Iowa producer, which is just absolutely fantastic.
So there's a lot of wins for farmers in this act, and I've seen that from a bunch of commodity groups out there. Looking at President Trump and the Trump administration's promises to farmers, what is left to go? What would you like to see beyond what was in this?
Well, yeah, there's, there, as good as this bill is when it comes to the finances, and it does leave a lot of things that's left undone or left in the lurch. And, specifically weighted towards Iowa producers are issues like Proposition 12 or year-round E15. Some of those policy-driven things that aren't necessarily a congressional fiscal situation. Those things are left yet to be settled. And so we need to take care of those things. We need to find vehicles to make sure that those policies are dealt with appropriately and completely. And so, really, we're still going to push for a unified farm bill. We're still going to try to get some of those policy issues moving forward, even though some of our risk management tools are taken care of in this bill for the time being. That does not negate the need for a future farm bill. So you have some of those situations. Then there's the reconciliation package is going to expire in 2031. So it's we at least the farm program parts of it. So we still need to move forward.
Hey, Brent, hold that thought. This is Farm Here Daily. We'll continue our conversation here in a moment, but first, let's take a look at the marketplace. And the start of the week trading session closed in the red after the 3-day holiday weekend. July corn 13.5 cents weaker, 4.18. September 16 3/4 down at 4.03.5. July soybeans 24.5 cents in the red at $10.31 3/4. August 24 cents weaker at $10.31.5. In soybean meal, July $5.30 a ton in the red at $268.50. July wheat 8 cents lower at $5.39 3/4, with September falling 8 1/4 at $5.48.5. In the livestock market close for Monday, August live cattle up $1.85 a hundredweight, $215.90, with October $2.05 higher at $212.95. Feeder cattle in August $4.22 a hundredweight in the green at $313.72. September rising $4.15 at $313.52. Lean hogs in July down $1.02 a hundredweight at $106.95, with August up $1 at $107.10 a hundredweight. That is the Monday market close. This is Farm Here Daily. We're speaking with Brent Johnson, president of the Iowa Farm Bureau. And Brent, we talked a lot about the wins within this One Big Beautiful Bill Act for farmers, but let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges ahead. After the bill was passed, I believe there were some Democrats saying they weren't willing to go to the negotiating table on the farm bill. And you spoke about how you wanted to move towards that. It's 2 years late and it's 6 years old, and it's very important to get that done. How is there going to be some reconciliation between the parties on passing a bipartisan farm bill from here?
Yeah, well, I surely hope so. There's a lot about a farm bill that, really should not be a partisan issue. And, there's things left undone. There's work still to to accomplish. And, some of the non-financial pieces that are left to discuss yet are things like Proposition 12, E15 and whatnot. And you're right, some of the disagreements around the SNAP program creates some tension. Obviously, this was fairly pretty much along party lines. So there's some discontentment with where we're at, largely wrapped around all of the cuts in the SNAP side of the program. And, ultimately that many of the increases came to the farm sector. So, the farm programs actually got about a $66 billion increase, even though the SNAP program got a significant decrease. Much of those decreases, really came from, some years of very significant increases over the last handful of years in the SNAP program. And, there's a lot of abuse over there. So to try to pull in the reins a little bit, make sure that we're spending tax dollars appropriately, wisely, efficiently. I think it's good to look at it. Good to look at it on any bill that comes out of Washington. But we'll see where common ground is. The idea of a future farm bill. What does that look like now that some of these financial risk management tools are in this reconciliation package? What's the tolerance going to be for a farm bill? What does a future farm bill look like? There's a lot of things that we're exploring. There's a lot of questions to be answered. There's a lot of questions yet to be asked. And so to find out where we're headed, it's a valid question as to what this looks like. But ultimately, we've still got a lot of work to do. Some of these policy issues, they're very significant for Iowa's family farmers to make sure that we can continue to grow into an entirely different financial situation where profitability's been tough, costs are high, tariffs are a real concern on both sides of the balance sheet, on the input side as well as finding our export markets, and that just rolls right into trade and some of these future conversations. So there's a lot on farmers' minds. There's a lot on lawmakers' plates, and we're trying to get the best of both worlds there, if at all possible. But we are working hard for the Iowa farmer.
I'm getting a sense of hope then in terms of finding common ground and working on a farm bill together again. Do you think there'll be any concessions then to potentially get folks back to the negotiating table? Because there was that unity of we work on nutrition and farm in the same title, so we have urban and rural interests in one package. Do you think that there will be any problems then moving forward with some of the urban legislators who are going to be particularly upset about the SNAP cuts?
Well, that's a good question that remains to be seen. But it does. If there's a silver lining to be found out of some really tough years over the past few, the pandemic and a lot of people want to be closer to their food sources. And so, there actually might be a tolerance for some conversations. There's a lot of interest right now in, direct marketing your beef or your pork or farmers markets. And a lot of that is just derived by the fact that people want to know where their food's coming from. They want to understand the system that it's grown up in, and to know that it's good, healthy, and complete food for their families. And so, there might be some opportunities in those conversations to have some nice conversations on both sides of the aisle to make sure that our nation's food sources are strong, complete, and we're not relying on other countries to feed our children.
Another challenge that I honestly don't know the answer to, and this might be something that we find out later as well, was there were a lot of cuts to some of the Green New Deal stuff that was going on. I know carbon reduction and carbon sequestration is a pretty huge potential market for ethanol producers when it comes to something like sustainable aviation fuel. It's not a market that we've really got a good grasp on just yet, but there were some pretty massive predictors for how much ethanol that could potentially use. Do you know if there's any concerns about that potentially coming into some issues or conflicts with some of the cuts and reductions of that Green New Deal?
Yeah, that there are yet to be determined. Ultimately, is what the answer is going to be. But this administration really has a distaste for the Green New Deal type of talking points or the money set aside for those things. So we'll see where this entire market ends up going, but this is, and it's a struggle point, to be honest with you. There's a lot of farmers who don't believe in any of the climate change or Green New Deal kind of things. And then there's another segment of farmers that are fully supportive of finding new opportunities for new markets and building in premiums for products grown certain ways, and so there's a wide cavern in between those two camps many times. And so there's, to be honest with you, we've got some homework to do. There's some opportunities in the future. I'm certain of it. I think we've got some new technology coming in the next handful of years that is going to be extremely exciting. And where that takes us in this carbon climate conversation, we'll see where we end up. But I've been very fortunate to travel the world, literally promoting Iowa agriculture. And I do hear conversations in other countries talking about climate. And when we do that, yes, they talk about climate. Yes, it's a talking point, but ultimately it comes down to who can provide the consistent, high quality product for the price that's needed. And so there's these blended, mixed, confusing conversations, and there's positive comments on both sides of the argument. There's negative conversations on both sides of the argument, and time will tell where we actually land out. But ultimately, if you look at the trajectory of production in Iowa, in the United States, the carbon footprint is smaller and smaller and smaller as years goes on. I've got a somewhat unique ability to have an economics department at my disposal. And so I asked them last year to look at the carbon footprint of corn today versus corn in the past. And since 1977, which was the peak in carbon production, Iowa farmers have reduced their carbon footprint by the bushel by 50%.
Wow.
And that's something that we need to do a better job of telling our story, celebrating the advancements, the efficiencies, the reasons why farmers in Iowa, farmers in the Midwest are literally the best in the world at what they do. And to reduce your carbon footprint by 50% in 40 years is something that is not going to stop. So farmers are going to continue to work in that direction, whether it's incentivized by taxes or by increased values of products, or just by farmers being farmers and wanting to be more efficient, doing better, and leaving the situation better than what they found it in.
I feel like it's an important question to ask, but it's also difficult because it does infringe on values and principles and morality on the Green New Deal side. But if you break it down into economics or a practical level, you have to look at innovation and what future markets might be made from this type of event. So we'll definitely keep an eye on your guys' economic team, because I'm sure they'll be looking at some of that dollar value per investment for us here in the future.
For sure. And one thing that, we need to keep top of mind is profitability for farmers. And, it's been generationally something that farmers don't easily talk about. We don't want to talk about making money. We don't want to talk about having things, but ultimately we're running businesses, and there's really good managers out here, and those farmers need to be profitable. And if there's opportunities to do so while increasing efficiencies, putting out high quality products, they're going to do that. And we don't need to be shy about turning a profit in the industry that we are. And if that shows up in a tax credit, if that shows up in product valuations because of specialty markets, or however those farmers are going to find innovative ways to move the commodities that they're growing, we need to make sure that those farmers have the opportunity to turn a profit and not be regulated into a circumstance where, maybe we're producing something by a graced attitude, but it's not profitable anymore. That's certainly not sustainable. That's something that's not going to be workable long term in the future. So we gotta have wins on both sides of this conversation.
I think that's a great place to wrap up our conversation about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Iowa Farm Bureau President Brent Johnson here on Farm Here Daily. We really appreciate your time.
Very good. Thanks, David.
Thanks again, Brent. This is Farm Here Daily, a Field Forward podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Again, in order to continue to produce this type of local content, we would love to have you join our community. So please follow the podcast and check out our social media at Field Forward Pod. Additionally, you can find me on social media at Geiger Reports, as well as WHO TV Channel 13 every weekday in their morning and noon hour programs. Again, I am your host, David Geiger, and I'll be back again tomorrow, everybody.